What's up guys, Asian here again with another kind of build video, theory crafting video. And today we're just going to be talking about red CP distributions for DPS mainly, as well as healers for all the different vet trials in the game. So now that the CP cap has been raised in Murkmire, it is now 810. That gives us 270 CPs to put into our various red CP nodes, as well as our green CPs. So we're going to be going over just specifically red and green CPs for the various different trials in the game, vet content in the game. We will not be covering blue CPs because that is going to be more specific to whether you're a magic DPS or a stamina DPS, as well as your specific class as well has a little bit of an impact on where your blue CPs are going to go. So if you're interested in the blue CP distributions, you will have to check out build videos instead, for example mine or Alcast's, in order to get a more accurate blue CP distribution. So again, this is for DPS and healers, specifically red and blue green CPs. So we're going to start off first with our red CPs, and we're going to start with what I like to call the Magicka heavy trials. So these are trials where you're basically going to be taking a lot of magic damage. These are going to be trials like vMaw, Ethereal Archive, and Cloud Rest. These three trials combined, all three of these have a lot of magic damage coming in. You don't really have that much physical damage coming in. So as you can see here, we don't really have any points in Hardy. We have nothing in Hardy in order to best maximize our reduction for magic damage. So for red CPs, for Ethereal Archive, vMaw, Lorcage, as well as Cloud Rest, this is the typical red CP setup that I recommend. This is the bare minimum I'd recommend. I have 75 into Elemental Defender, then I have 61 into Thick Skin, because there are still dots that you're going to want to help mitigate against. So for example, Overcharge and Ethereal Archive, as well as the Dark Drain dot from Cloud Rest. Those are all affected by Thick Skin, so you do want to have a couple of points in the Thick Skin, and we do have a lot of points to kind of divide among these different nodes here. Then we have 81 into Ironclad, and then we put the remaining 53 into Spell Shield. So this basically gives you the best amount of damage resistance against magical damage, as you can imagine. Ironclad, just because you're mostly going to be direct damage you're going to be taking. The Spell Shield increases your spell resistance. Thick Skin, again, for those occasional dots, you still want to have some mitigation against them. And Elemental Defender, obviously, for the magical damage is coming in. So that's either Flame, Frost Shock, or Magic. Again, we're not really seeing any sort of physical damage, so that's physical, poison, and disease damage from these trials. So this is the red CP setup that you will be the most effective for you. There is obviously you can take 10 points out of Spell Shoot if you'd like and put them into Quick Recovery in order to get the field position passive. It's not absolutely necessary, but if it is an option for those of you who do want to try to go that route. The next kind of set of trials that I like to consider are going to be what's called the hybrid trials. These are trials where you have both physical and magical damage coming in. So the two trials that kind of fall into this category are going to be Halls of Fabrication and then Hellfire Citadel. So basically the two H trials there. So in those two trials, you are going to be getting hit by physical as well as magical damage. So in order to kind of best mitigate that, you need to go for a very balanced approach when it comes to how you want to set up your CPs. So this is the typical setup that I would recommend. You just drop Elemental Defender to 64, Hardy goes to 64, and you have 61 in Thick Skinned. Again, there are several dots, especially in Halls of Fabrication, that you're going to want to help mitigate, and then 81 into Ironclad to help reduce those direct damage attacks. The direct damage attacks are going to be the ones that typically are going to kill you, so you do want to kind of minimize the amount of damage you're taking in this instance. So this is a pretty straightforward setup here. Again, this is for Halls of Fabrication and Hellfire Citadel because you will be taking both physical and magical damage in those two trials. Again, if you do want to have that field position passive, then take 10 points out of Thick Skin this time, and then you can put them into Quick Recovery so you get that field position passive that way. Now, the next trial is Sanctum Ophidia. So Sanctum is kind of unique out of all the different trials in that it deals a little bit more physical damage and magical damage. There is one source of, or I should say two fights, two mobs that can hit you with magic damage. That's going to be Ozara, which is a boss, as well as the Overchargers. But beyond those two, it's pretty much all going to be poison damage or physical damage. So for Sanctum Ophidia, you're actually going to usually spec more heavily into physical damage resistance rather than magical damage resistance, just because the amount of magic damage you're actually taking isn't actually that great. So you're actually going to end up dropping Elemental Defender down to something like 43, and then you can drop, and then you can basically put the 21 points into either medium armor focus or light armor focus, depending on if you're a stamina or magic DPS. You still want 64 points in the hardy, because again, you will be taking a little bit more physical damage compared to magical damage. You still do want some magical damage resistance there, because again, Ozara and the overcharges, they're both, while they're not necessarily dangerous, you still kind of want to mitigate the damage regardless, especially from the overchargers, just because the overcharge that they place on you is fairly dangerous, so you still do want to have that there, mitigate that damage on top of the poison cloud that's also put on top of you. And then finally, the last trial is Asylum Sanctorium. Asylums are going to be a little bit different from the other Magicka intensive trials, mainly because of the amount of damage that's coming out in Asylum compared to the other Magic trials. So compared to both all three of the Magic trials, so Maw, Ethereal Archive, and Cloud Rest, Asylum has a lot of damage coming out, and it usually comes out all in one hit. So you do want to kind of help mitigate that and kind of help out your healers a little bit. There's also pretty much no dots in Asylum unless you are a kiter, unless you are a healer, in which case you might want to just stick to the Maw, AA, and Cloud Rest CPs to help mitigate the bleed from Felms. But otherwise, if you are going Cloud Rest as a DPS, you're pretty much going to be doing more or less exactly what you've been seeing for Ethereal Archive, Maw, and Cloud Rest, except you will be taking pretty much all of your points out of Thick Skinned. So again, you're going to go up to, let's say, 57 into Spell Shield. And then you're basically going to put a couple of points here into Quick Recovery here. And that's just to help out your healers a little bit to kind of get some more heals going for you. Again, Asylum doesn't have many dots unless you're a healer, in which case you will be putting some points in the Thick Skin here. But otherwise, if you're a DPS, there's really no point into investing in the Thick Skin, and you're better off investing into something like Quick Recovery instead to help out your healers, because to heal through the damage that's coming through. Especially if you're doing hard mode, there's a lot of damage that comes out during Asylum, so having that additional healing received bonus is very nice to have. And again, if you by doing this, you also gain the Field Physician and Infusion passive, which is really super helpful, especially if you're trying to progress through Asylum. Now, I do want to point out here the two 4-man trials, I guess you can call them. They're more just like 4-man content, so that's going to be Dragonstar Arena and the new 4-man content, Black Rose Prison. So in those instances, as DPS and as healers, again, you're going to be focusing more on reducing the magical damage, but there is still some physical damage that's coming in that you still want to mitigate. So you can basically think of the 4-man content as kind of a reverse of Sanctum Ophidia, where you kind of want to get a little bit more balance, but you still want to skew it a little bit more heavily towards spell magic damage resistance. So you're just going to put 64 into Elemental Defender, and as you can imagine, you're just going to go up to 44, 43 I should say here. Still want to max out Ironclad at 81. There are still some dots here, so you still want to put 51 in the Thick Skin, and then just put the rest of the points into Spell Shield. Again, you still want to kind of maximize your spell resistance a little bit more, because that's generally going to be a little bit more dangerous than the physical damage, just because the physical damage is coming mostly from melee, and in that instance the tank is usually able to pick those up, and particularly as a magic DPS, you're able to kind of run away from melee ads in case they try to hit you. You can dodge roll out of them, but it's a lot harder to do that with Magicka ads, because they typically have ranged attacks. So this is what I would recommend for things like Dragonstar Arena, Black Rose Prison, and even for Maelstrom Arena as well. If you're doing Maelstrom Arena, you still want to help mitigate against that magical damage in Maelstrom Arena. So 81 Ironclad, 31 Spell Shield, 51 Thick Skin, 43 Hardy, and 64 Elemental Defender. In 4-man content, as well as obviously in Maelstrom Arena, there's really no point in getting Field Physician. The exception maybe being for Black Rose Prison, but other than that, there's really not a huge advantage of getting Field Physician compared to something like in a trial, just because the kind of pressure that you're under in 4-man content is not quite as high compared to trials content, where losing, like, let's say 1 or 2 DPS is actually a fairly big deal compared to losing a DPS in 4-man content. If you're losing 2 DPS in 4-man content, then typically it's just going to end up being a wipe unless your tank is able to, use Magma Shell or something and res somebody. or is able to self-sustain, and the healer is able to res somebody. So really there's no point, at least in my opinion, to pick up the field physician passive for if your goal is just to kind of run 4-man content, dungeons and Maelstrom Arena, obviously, because there's no one to res in Maelstrom Arena. So that's pretty much it for all the red CPs. Now let's go ahead and go over our green CPs. For the most part, your green CPs are going to be pretty much identical across almost all the trials in the game. There are obviously going to be some special instances that I'm going to point out here. So the first thing obviously is you have 75, at least if you're following my guides, you will be having 75 in Tenacity and 75 into either Arcanist or Mooncalf. That leaves 120 points. So typically speaking, in most trials, just going 40-40-40 across Shadow Ward, Tumbling, and then Warlord is typically a fairly good setup here. Most trials will require you to use Break Free as well as Dodge Roll and Block, so just going for a very balanced approach is a pretty safe route to go. However, like I said, there are a few trials where you are going to want to kind of reinvest those points a little bit more. So for example, in Cloud Arrest, you might want to take some points out of Shadow Ward, because you really won't be blocking that much in Cloud Arrest as a DPS, and put them in a Sprinter instead. This is especially important if you're the healer that might be going around putting the shards down, if you're in the portal group, just because it helps reduce the cost of your sprinting. You will be sprinting around a lot in Cloud Arrest, so it's useful to have some cost reduction in Sprinter. This is also true for tanks as well. You do want to invest some points into Sprinter as a tank, just because you will be running around trying to chase the Maja around a lot. So just being able to reduce your stamina cost of sprinting is pretty nice to have in Cloud Rest. In not Asylum. In Halls of Fabrication, you will actually be using Breaking Free quite a lot. So again, you do want to take some points out of Tumbling. You can take 20 points out of Tumbling and put them in a Warlord if you'd like. You can even drop one more point out of Tumbling if you'd like to get that last percentage point there into Warlord. And that's mainly because of what we like to call the mittens. I forget what their actual names are called, but they're basically adds that basically will shoot out conduit strikes, and these will stun you if you're not blocking. So you still want to have that block reduction on there, just because you will be blocking those. But in case you do run out of stamina, you will have to break free out of them, or if you miss a block, you'll have to break free. So having this is going to be very useful, especially in the last half of Halls of Fabrication, where you will basically be seeing a lot of conduit strikes from the 4th boss and the 5th boss, the final boss, as well as what we like to call the grabby hands, the little AoE mechanical hands that will also stun you. So breaking free reduction is pretty important to have in Halls of Fabrication, so I highly recommend picking up 60 into Warlord, and you still want to have some cost reduction here just for that additional block. Other than that, none of the other trials really have any sort of special green CPs. Again, just going to 40-40-40 is typically good enough for the remainder of the trials. So it's really only Cloud Rest and Halls of Fabrication where you might want to shift some CP points around in order to kind of best deal with the situations at hand. Maw of Larkage, the 3 Craglorn trials, Asylum, those you're pretty much are going to be doing equal amounts of blocking, dodge rolling, and breaking free. So going to 40-40-40 that I recommend is the best balanced approach to kind of reducing your stamina cost for those 3 actions there. So that's pretty much it for this video. I will have all of this kind of written down in the description below, specific to each trial. Unfortunately, I do not have an updated graphic, so I don't have a link for that. I am in the process of asking somebody to kind of make one for Hellfire Dominion. And once that is released, I'll go ahead and post a link to that down in the description below. But for right now, I'm just going to post just kind of a written version of what I went over here today down in the description for those of you guys who kind of want to see it written out. That's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.